their spiritual journey with Swami Sarvapriyananda. Before we start the journey, I would like to announce some housekeeping rules. Please take a moment to put your cell phone on silent mode or turn them off. Washrooms are at the end of the corridor when you exit the hall. The cafeteria, you can exit the hall and turn left at the end of the corridor. Both are signposted. Food and drinks are not allowed in the auditorium except water. You have been given wristbands at the registration desk. Please keep them on all day. Please do not reserve seats for anyone other than the participants who accompany you to this location. Seat assignments are done by the volunteers, and you should be using this seat for the entire day. When you leave the hall, you can leave your book or any other item on the seat and mark the row, and you will be sitting at that seat all day. Please do not change your seats. You have been given notebooks and pens to take notes of the talk. Write your name on the notebook and you can leave it on the seat. There is a question and answer session at the end of the retreat. If you have any questions, please write them down and drop them in the box on the stage. Every question may not be addressed, but there's volunteers and Swami will screen the questions and answer your questions. When the first talk is over, I will give you further directions about the tea break. Now I'll invite Swami Sarvapriyananda to do the invocation prayer and talk. Thank you.
Vishvam darpana drishyamana nagari Tulyam nijantargatam Pashyannatmani mayaya Mahivotthonayatha nidraya Yasakshat kunute prabodhasamaye Vasmanamevadvayam Tasmai Shri Gurumurtaye Namaidam Shri Dakshinamurtaye Bijasyantarivakuro Jagavidam Prangniruvikalpam Punaha Maya Kalpita Desha Kala Kalana Vaichitya Chitrekrutam Mayaveva Vijambayatyapi Maha Yogi Vayasvechaya Tasmai Shri Gurumurtaye Namaidam Shri Dakshinamurtaye Yatyaiva Spuranam Sadatmakam Asat Kalparthakam Bhasate Sakshat Tattvamaviti Vedavachata Yobodhayatyashvika Yat Sakshat Karanat Bhaved Na Punaravrittir Bhavambo Nidho Tasmai Shri Gurumurtaye Namaidam Shri Dakshinamurtaye Nana Chidra Ghatodhara Sthitamaha Deepaprabhavaswaram Jnanayasya tu chakshuradikaranatvarabahispandate Janamiti tameva bhandam anubhavyetat samastan jagad Tasmai Shri Gurumurtaye Namaidam Shri Dakshinamurtaye Deham pranamapindriyam yapichalam Buddhim cha shunyam viduh Tribalandhajanopamastrahvidhi Bhrantabhrasham vadinaha Maya Shakti Vilasa Kalpitamaha Vyamoha Samharine Tasmai Shri Gurumurtaye नम इदं श्रीदक्षिणामूर्तये राहुग्रस्तदिवाकरेन्दुसदृशः मायासमाच्छादना सन्मात्रकरणोपसंहरणदः योगो सुषुप्तः पुमान् प्रागस्वाप्समिति प्रबोधसमये यः प्रत्यभिज्ञायते तस्मै श्रीगुरुमूर्तये नम इदं श्रीदक्षिणामूर्तये बाल्यादिष्वपि जाग्रदादिषु तथा सर्वास्वस्थास्वपि व्यावृत्तास्वनुवर्तमानम् अहमित्यं तत्पुरन्तं सदा स्वात्मानं प्रकटीकरोति भजतां यो मुद्रया भद्रया तस्मै श्रीगुरुमूर्तये नम इदं श्रीदक्षिणामूर्तये विश्वं पश्यति कार्यकारणतया स्वस्वामि सम्बन्धतः शिष्याचार्यतया तथैव पितृपुत्राद्यात्मना भेदतः स्वप्ने जाग्रति वाय एष पुरुषः मायापरिभ्रामिरः तस्मै श्रीगुरुमूर्तये नम इदं श्रीदक्षिणामूर्तये भूरम्भास्यनलो निलोम्बरमहर्नाथो हिमांशुः पुमान् इत्याभाति चराचरात्मकमिदं यस्यैव मूर्त्यष्टकम् नान्यत्किञ्चन विद्यते विमृशताम् यस्मात् परस्मात् विभोः तस्मै श्रीगुरुमूर्तये नम इदं श्रीदक्षिणामूर्तये सर्वात्मत्वमिति स्फुटीकृतमिदं यस्मादमुष्मिंस्तवे तेनास्य श्रवणात् तदर्थमननात् ध्यानाच्च सङ्कीर्तनात् सर्वात्मत्वमहाविभूतिसहितं स्यात् ईश्वरत्वं स्वतः सिद्ध्येतत् पुनरष्टधा परिणतञ्च ऐश्वर्यमव्याहतम्
ॐ असतो मा सद्गमय तमसो मा ज्योतिर्गमय मृत्युर्मामृतं गमय ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः ॐ lead us from the unreal to the real, lead us from darkness unto light, lead us from death to immortality. Om peace, peace, peace. Namaste and good morning everybody and welcome back. We have been studying the Dakshinamurti Stotra yesterday. And this Dakshinamurti Stotra is basically, it's like a treasure box with all the gems from Vedanta. Whatever you get by studying the Upanishads, the different texts of Vedanta, have more or less been presented in outline in this beautiful hymn composed by Adi Shankaracharya. We read how our reality is pure consciousness, and that pure consciousness appears as sentient beings like us through our body and mind. And it appears as God, who is here, Dakshinamurti Shiva, Shiva facing the south. But facing the south is basically a symbolism for grace. And here the special grace is, the Lord is gracious not just in terms of giving us money and nice things in the world, but the liberating knowledge, the knowledge of the self, who we are, what we are, and that sets us free from samsara. And the same Dakshinamurti, same consciousness, which is ourselves, which is God, is also the Guru who stands for the Shastras, for Vedanta, who gives us, through whom comes this saving knowledge. And we saw how in the first verse, the universe is compared to a city in a mirror. A beautiful example. Or something seen in a dream. Then what are we? We are that mirror, or we are that dreamer, the dreaming mind. And with respect to the mirror, we also saw how that city is not a second separate reality. It is that mirror alone, appearing as a city. So this is called non-duality, where in spite of the appearance of multiplicity, there's only one reality. And that one reality is you, and what we mean by you is consciousness or awareness. But by consciousness and awareness, again, I want us to be careful. We don't mean thinking, speaking, walking, talking. You know. What we mean is bare awareness, awareness in itself, existence in itself. Here existence and awareness and fulfillment, Satchidananda, are seen to be one reality. Then we saw how this whole universe arises from this one consciousness. How can a variety arise? Well, with the possibility of the appearance of a variety is in the seed form, like a seed sprouts into a plant. In the seed form, it is indistinguishable. There are no roots, branches, leaves, fruits. But when it sprouts, from that one homogeneous seed, a tree with all its glory comes, all its variety, all its colors and different parts of the tree, it arises. Similarly, from what seems to be the one featureless Brahman, existence, consciousness, bliss, through this inscrutable, inexplicable, indeterminable power called Maya, arises this multiplicity of the universe. Or more specifically, more precisely, arises the display of this universe. Not that it actually sprouted into a distinct, separate universe. And then, in the third verse, he put it together, Shankaracharya puts these two together and says, that which is you and that which is this universe, they are not two thats, they are the same thing. That thou art, Tat Tvamasi. Put it in more Vedantic terms, that which is the witness of waking, dreaming, deep sleep. So what's the witness of waking, dreaming, deep sleep? You! You are the witness. Right now, you are experiencing your waking state. You are experiencing the dream state. And you also experience the deep sleep state. And these are states of the mind. Waking is a state of the mind. Dreaming is a state of the mind. And when the mind gets withdraws into itself, that seed state is called deep sleep. Deep sleep. So these states are experienced by you. That which is the witness of the three states. And that which appears as existence in all beings. You see, everywhere here is existence. You see, it experiences it everywhere as an ocean of existence with names and forms. Just as in an ocean, it's an ocean of water, but you have waves and foam and surf and bubbles and so on. Similarly, here we have an ocean of existence, and yet it appears to us as chairs and people and carpet and space and the ceiling, all of them. That which is the witness of the three states, meaning you, the consciousness, and that which appears as the existence of this entire universe, they are two, they are one and the same. That's the meaning of Tat Tvamasi. I'm just translating from the Hindi. When Mahatma explained this way, what is the meaning of Tat Tvamasi? जो अवस्थात्रय साक्षी आत्मा है, चैतन्य है, वही जगत व्यापक, जगत व्यंजक सत्ता है. The existence of this entire universe and you, the consciousness, are one reality. That's the meaning of Tat Tvamasi. We understand it in this way. What's the core, primary sense we have about ourselves? What are we basically? We are consciousness, basically. We are awareness, basically. To our sense of self, only one thing is indispensable, that is awareness. And what is this universe basically? It is all its variety. One thing is common to all the variety, that it exists. It is. I remember reading this book. So Vedanta says the two are the same. You, the consciousness, and this existence are the same reality. That's the meaning of that thou art, tat tvamasi. That basically means you are this universe. This universe is an appearance in you. You are appearing as this universe, the real you. That is the meaning of Aham Brahmasmi. I am all of it. Swami Virajanandaji, one of the presidents of our order, he quotes from, I think it's the Avadhuta Gita, probably, or Ashtavakra, Avadhuta probably. He says, this universe with all its varieties and this body is presented to me at once. Either I am all of it or none of it. To you, the awareness is presented the mind, the body, and this universe. I am just bare awareness existence. I am none of this. Or I am all of this. When we dream and we wake up from the dream and we look back upon the dream, we can say both. Whoever I saw in the dream, whatever happened in the dream, I am none of it, because none of it happened really. Or I am all of it. Whatever was there, I only was there. Who else was there in my dream? Nobody else. So in the same way, I was reading this book, Jim Holtz, Why Does the World Exist? It's an existential detective story. So what he does, he's a science reporter in New York. What he did was, he went out talking to people who were scientists, mathematicians, physicists, philosophers, theologians, people in different fields. And the most profound, and also the cutting edge, computer scientists also, the most profound, the most cutting edge thought, understanding of existence. Why does anything exist at all? Not why does this table exist? You can explain. This plastic was made like this, and that company came together and made this table. You can give some explanation. Not why does this table exist? Why does anything exist at all? Why does the whole universe exist? So that question. And after going through many answers, you meet some of the leading scientists of the world, physicists and all. You're going through many answers, scientific, theological, philosophical, even computer science. Information theory, there's a chapter, It from Bit. The universe has arisen from information. It's like that, many theories, some of them really far out. At the end, he talks to an American philosopher, I forget the name, anyway, who says, see, we are not getting any closer to the answer of why does everything exist. And then he says, maybe, I was just thinking, do they mention Vedanta anywhere at all? And he says, maybe, just maybe, the ancient Hindus were right. Atman is Brahman. That's the explanation for the existence of the universe. Our ChatGPT founder, the OpenAI founder, Sam Altman. So it seems, I actually saw it, the Twitter feed, the X feed, where somebody asked him, tell us something that you believe which people don't know. And he said, I believe that Atman is Brahman. All right. This is what we saw in the third verse. In the fourth verse, which was a very beautiful verse where it is shown to us all our experience, whatever we are having right now. This is a very important verse, an epistemological verse. All our experience, right now you are seeing, hearing, you have a sense of personal existence, you are thinking. Our sensory experiences, our mental thoughts, intellectual thoughts, our emotions, our sense of personal existence, all of that. How does this happen? And he gives the example of a big pot where there's a lamp inside that big pot, a big lamp, which is shining, blazing forth with the flame of the lamp. And there are holes in the pot and beams of light are shooting out. So basically the idea was this pure consciousness, mediated through the mind and the senses, becomes what is called vritti jnana. Consciousness in and through mental activity, consciousness in and through sensory activity, and enables us to have our worldly knowledge. This is the link between that bare consciousness and the consciousness with which we are more familiar, what we call consciousness, what consciousness studies people call consciousness. That is, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, thinking, judging, remembering, our activities of mind and senses. The connection is between, we spoke about Swarupa Jnana and Vritti Jnana. Remember, the example which I gave about the sun and the moon, sunlight and moonlight, like that. What we are using now is the moonlight, but this moonlight is drawn from the sun. And just as this moonlight, every instance of moonlight can be traced back to the sun, every instance of our worldly knowledge, this kind of sensory and mental thinking and sensing can be traced back to pure consciousness which we are. It is nothing but the pure consciousness coming through the mind and the senses. One might say, yeah, but the mind and senses are there, right? And the world is there. But remember the seed sprouting into the plant? So even the world and the senses and the mind, all of these are appearances of that one pure consciousness only. So there is always this unbroken, undisturbed non-duality, Advaita. Now, let's go on. In the 5th and 6th verses, what will happen is this. The teaching about Advaita is incomplete. Non-duality, the basic teaching, the fundamental ideas are all in place now. But serious objections may arise at this point. People might say, I'm sorry to rain on your parade, Swami, on your non-dual parade. But there are many other opinions here, many other theories here. Why should I accept your idea that I am this one non-dual consciousness and the entire universe is an appearance in this non-dual consciousness? Why should I accept? But Brahman, as you have formulated it, that is the only reality, whether that is at all a reality or not. And the world is an appearance. Is the world an appearance or is it a reality? And I am Brahman, the sentient being is Brahman. Is that so? Or am I just the body? After all your fancy theories, the moment the body dies and the brain is destroyed, all your so-called consciousness, Atman, Brahman, all will disappear. Gone forever. Finished. Why wait till the death of the body? The moment you are under anesthesia, general anesthesia, gone. Your so-called consciousness is gone. Why even wait for general anesthesia? Every time you fall asleep, every time we sleep at night, deep sleep, not dream, deep sleep, we have no experience at all. Everything disappears. I don't experience a word, I don't experience the body, I don't experience the mind, I don't even experience I am sleeping. That also is not nothing. How can you, in the face of so many theories and so much evidence against the continuity of consciousness and existence, how can you claim that I am existence, consciousness, bliss? So, opposing theories, why are there, if this is what you are saying is the truth, then why are there so many theories of the self? In Indian philosophy itself, over the last 3,000-4,000 years, multiple theories of the self have come. Quite different from the Advaitic idea that I am Brahman, this Advaitic conclusion. So what are those theories? Why do they come up? And what is our answer to them? So you might say that's a tall order, and it is. There are books and books about this. This is called dialectics, Advaita dialectics, non-dual dialectics, where the Advaitin philosophers reply to the charges against them. The other possibilities, different points of view, different opinions, different philosophies, and there is debate, refutation and counter-refutation. And this goes on. It was called Vada Vivada. This was a feature of ancient India. Very wonderful feature, I would say, where instead of fighting and cutting each other's throats on the name of religion, they would fight. But the fight would be what Will Durant called a gladiatorial combat of intellect. You know, at the level of experts, pundits, scholars, who had mastered their own system and other opposing systems of thought, and they would engage in debate. And these debates led to the development of philosophy. I think there are 3 golden periods in the development of Indian philosophy. One was the post-Vedic period, the development of the sutra literature. The Yoga Sutras, the Mimamsa Sutras, the Vedanta, Brahma Sutras, and so on, Nyaya Sutras, Vaisheshika Sutras, where a body of philosophical knowledge was organized and made into a coherent system of thought and put in cryptic sutra form. That was the genesis of the philosophy. Vedas existed. Spiritual practices and enlightenment, all that pre-existed. But to put it in a philosophical, logical form, that came at a certain time. And then that was one golden period. Then the second golden period of Indian philosophy, I feel that when the Buddhists attacked the Hindu systems, we believe in the Atman, and the Buddhists say there is no Atman. We believe in the existence of God, and the Buddhists say there is no God. And this led to a 1,000-year, more or less a 1,000-year debate till the end of the first millennium on these issues and many other issues, every issue of philosophy. And what it did was, if you ask who won it, it depends on whom you ask. If you ask the Buddhists, they won it. And if you ask us, we won it. But who won? I always say the winner is Indian philosophy, Bharatiya Darshan. Tremendous development of Indian philosophy. Books and books, commentaries and sub-commentaries, schools of thought became very consistent, very logical with supporting literature. This happened over 1,000 years. Then the third period of development of Indian philosophy was when Advaita Vedanta, non-dual Vedanta, it was already ruling the roost post Shankara, and then many other schools. This is within Hinduism. Vishishta Dvaita, Dvaita Vedanta, Shuddha Dvaita, Dvaita Dvaita, Achintya Veda Vedanta, multiple schools of Vedanta arose, each claiming to be the genuine interpretation of the Upanishads, and that led to an internal debate, again about 500 or 600 years. Again led to tremendous, at least it led to a tremendous development of Advaita Vedanta, Shankara, post-Shankara philosophers. So all that literature is there. He's not going to talk about that. That would take volumes and volumes. I think there's an effort to translate all of that into English. So Encyclopedia of Indian Philosophies, Karl Potter, I think, has been doing that. Already it is beyond 23 volumes, I think, or big volumes. All of that, he wants to give us a taste of it in two verses, verse 5 and verse 6. So we'll take a look. Verse 5. Deham pranamapi indriyanyapi chalam buddhim cha shunyam viduhu Stribalandha jadopamastvahamiti bhranta bhrisham vadinaha Maya shakti vilasa kalpita mahavyamoha sangharine Tasmai Shri Guru Murtaye Namaidam Shri Dakshinamurtaye. Verse 5, translation. Vociferous pseudo-philosophers regard the body, life, breath, senses of perception and organs of action, fleeting cognitions and total non-existence as I, the Atman. Their power of comprehension is comparable to that of women and children, the blind and the dull-witted. All right. Let me tackle the elephant in the room first. More than half of the audience is women, and how many children are there? But anyway, there's a point being made, right apart from the obvious, which sounds misogynistic. What Shankaracharya says here is, here are some views. These people don't consider that Atman is Chidananda Rupa Shivoham. No. Some people think, some thinkers, they're philosophers. They think the body is the self. This thing, the self is this, that's it. None of your fancy Atman, pure consciousness, none of that. This is the self. Or some variety of it, like the sensory system, or life itself. So this bunch of philosophers or thinkers, they are called Charvaka, materialists. And theirs is an esteemed school which continues down with full vigor till today. Others may have disappeared, but this is an ever popular school. This is the most obvious answer. What am I? This one. What is this? I. This I. It's instinctive. And that's how we believe and we act in this world. You don't need philosophy for it. But you can make a philosophy based on it. So, the view of the common person, I am the body. Or the view of philosophers based on this materialistic, body-oriented, body-self idea, the Charvaka. A little more sophisticated version of this is, yes, I am not the physical body, but I am the living body. I am the living body, life, prana. So self is a living body. It's not as crude as it sounds. It's pretty solid, you know. I remember I was talking to this philosopher today. I mean, today means in this day and age. A few years ago in New York. So they have these philosophy circles. Sometimes anybody is free to come and join. And philosophers from different universities, they come and conduct discussions. The discussion about consciousness. And this philosopher, Massimo, he is a biologist and a philosopher, teaching at City University in New York. So he said, I am convinced that consciousness is a product of the living brain. I am convinced that the consciousness is a product of the living brain. That's where we find it now. And that's what you need, a living brain, life, not just a brain, life. So I asked him, so you wouldn't accept that artificial intelligence, this was before ChatGPT and all, that would be conscious? He said, no, it can't be. Machines can be conscious? No. And so consciousness is independent of the brain? No. It is a byproduct of a living brain. Something happens. Can you prove it? No. He said, you can't prove it. Not right now, but what is called promissory materialism. Promissory materialism. Promissory materialism is, we have explained some things so far successfully, and we will explain how consciousness is produced by the living brain. Just give us 20, 30, 40 years. I promise to explain. What he told me was this. See, life, at one time it was thought life is a mystery. Science cannot explain life. And over the last few decades, we have understood what we call life down to the molecular level, the processes, and that's a good enough explanation. So life, we have explained. It just took us some time, 20, 30, 40, 50 years of effort, and we have now been able to understand what life is. Similarly, give us time, we'll be able to explain what consciousness is in terms of brain and nervous system activity. I give a Vedantic answer to that. I don't know if it had much traction. I said, look, it's a category mistake. A Vedantist will say what you are saying is a category mistake. Category mistake is, you explained life in terms of, more fundamental biological processes in the body. And that's all right from a Vedantic perspective, because you're explaining something objective, a complex objective phenomenon in terms of more fundamental objective phenomenon. Life is an objective phenomenon, according to Vedanta also. Prana, it's experienceable. Whatever is experienceable is an object. But when you say, I will explain the subject in terms of the object, the living brain, you are making a jump there. You're jumping from subject to object. I'm going to explain consciousness in terms of some objective phenomenon, which is presented to consciousness itself, brain processes. That's called a category mistake. He didn't respond to that. I don't think he was very impressed by that argument. But it's an essential Vedantic argument. What is an object? Anything that appears to you, anything that we experience is an object. Then what is consciousness? That to which all objects appear. That which cannot be classified as an object. Anidam Chaitanyam, Padmapada Acharya, Shankaracharya's disciple. Chaitanyam is Anidam, not this. Whatever you experience in your life, in your phenomenological, subjective experience, you experience as this table, then it's not consciousness. This body is not consciousness. This shirt is not consciousness. This thought, not consciousness. Consciousness in itself is that to which the thought, the body, the shirt, and the table appear. Table, shirt, body, even thought, object. This is the fault line between modern consciousness studies and say Vedanta and Sankhya and all of those theories. Because something like a thought, modern consciousness studies will say that's consciousness. Vedanta will say that's consciousness plus an object. The object is your thought, the contents of your thought. That is appearing to you, the consciousness. Anyway. So, prana, some people think a living body is the cell. Others will say, no. It is the sensory system with life and the body which constitutes the cell. Only when I am seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, I am aware of all kinds of inputs, all of this life going on, then I am a cell. And that requires senses, life plus body. These are all Charvakas, more and more refined materialists. All of them say this material entity, body, life, indriya, self, indriyas, sense organs, this is self. This is Atma. And then comes more sophisticated. Two more views are given. Both of them, interestingly, are Buddhist views. Buddhism has, broadly speaking, four schools, four philosophies. Sautrantika, Vaibhashika, Yogachara, Vijnanavada, and Madhyamaka, Shunyavada. We are concerned with the last two now, the mind-only school and the emptiness school. The mind-only school, which is called Vijnanavada, which says there is no external world. Just like in a dream, there is no world out there. It seemed as if there is a world out there. And Shankaracharya himself uses that example in the first verse. Bahirivaud bhutam yatha nidraya. When you're sleeping and dreaming, it seems that there is an external world. And you are in it also. But then when you wake up, it's all within you. Now, Shankaracharya uses it as an example to show the non-duality of the self. The mind-only school takes that very seriously, dead seriously, and says there is no external world even when you are awake. This is not outside you. Even this body is not outside. Even this mind, there is only consciousness, and in that consciousness, objects are presented. So that sounds like Vedanta? No. There's a very big difference. According to the mind-only school, Vijnanavada, these consciousness, these are not eternal awareness, not Brahman, Atman. These are flashes of consciousness. So in each flash of consciousness, here is a flash of consciousness in which what is presented to me, I, Sarvapriyananda, I am looking out at the audience, one flash of consciousness. Immediately after that, succeeding it, it is gone. That Sarvapriyananda is also gone, that audience is also gone, that flash of consciousness is also gone. Next comes instantly, another flash of consciousness arises. And that is, I, Sarvapriyananda, am looking at the book and speaking. Next flash of consciousness. It's gone already. By the time I'm speaking about it, it's gone already. Third flash of consciousness arises. What are we? We are a series of flashes of consciousness. Kshanika Vijnana Santati. A series of flashes of, momentary flashes of consciousness. How long does that consciousness last? Eternally. Universes arise and fall in it. No. One moment only. Arises, persists in one moment only, and then falls. Then again there's another one. Then again it falls. Then again another one comes. Like this. This series of flashes of consciousness is the only reality that there is. And it appears, in that consciousness, it appears, I am the subject, there is the object, but it's all within one flash of consciousness. This is called mind-only school. Vijnanavada, or what he calls Jalam Buddhim, unstable, momentary flashes of cognitions. That is the self. That's the only Atma there is. And that Atma is arising and falling every moment. How long does the Atma exist? I mean, Hindus will say eternally. No, that's nonsense. It exists for one moment. Then another moment, another Atma. Then another Atma. How many Atmas? Millions and billions and trillions of them. I am one such series. You are one such series. He or she, they're all one such series. There are multiple series of flashes of cognition. This is the worldview of the Vijnanavadi. Very similar, if you have studied Western philosophy, there is Bishop Berkeley, who is a subjective idealist. The world exists in the mind. And the mind is the reality. The world exists in your mind, the body exists in your mind. Somebody said, so when you're not looking at the world, it doesn't exist? I'm looking there at you. You exist now. Don't look at you. Don't exist anymore. No. Bishop Berkeley has a way of working around it. He says the tree in the quad. So there's a university quadrangle. There's a tree there. If I'm not looking at it, does the tree exist or not? He says it exists. Don't worry, because it exists in the mind of God. So the whole universe exists in the mind of God. So it is stable. Even when you are not looking, God is looking. So everything exists. Anyway, that is called subjective idealism. These Vijnanavadis are subjective idealists. Then comes another school. They were contemporary schools. This is called the school of emptiness, Shunyavada, Madhyamaka Shunyavada. The great master Nagarjuna, who lived 2,000 years, more than 2,000 years ago, in the south of India, in what is now Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, that area. one of the greatest philosophers of ancient India, Nagarjuna. And his master work is Moola Madhyamaka Karika. Moola Madhyamaka Karika. So what's the reality according to you, O Master Nagarjuna? Nothing. Emptiness. Emptiness is the reality. Is there a reality? He said. Did I say there was? Oh, so there is no reality. Did I say there wasn't? So there is both reality and there isn't reality. No, that is also not true. So there is neither reality nor not reality. That's also not true. This is called Chatushkoti Vinirmukta Tattvam. So something like the self, Atma. What is Nagarjuna's view? Is there an Atma? He said it is not that there is an Atma. Oh, so there is no Atma, no self. It is not that there is no self. Oh, so that there is the self and there is and the self and there is no self. It's not that there is a self and there is no self. Oh, so there is neither a self and neither not a self. The disjunction of it. That is also not true. Chatushkoti Vinirmukta Tattva. The reality. What are you saying? That's called emptiness. So emptiness is not that there is a positive self called Atma. It's also not nihilism, that there is nothing at all. Not like that. He said, Shunyata sarvadrishtina. All philosophies are empty. None of them will give you the truth. So his way is a way of deconstructing it. To understand what he does, let me tell you a little bit about the three types of debate. In ancient India, I said there's a lot of debate going on between different philosophies. So there are three types of debate. Vada, Jalpa, Vitanda. Vada. Vada is one kind of debate. What is the definition of that Vada? The definition is Tattva Bubhutsu Katha. The discussion between people who are interested in finding out the truth. This is Sishya Acharyana, between the disciples and the master. They want to ascertain the truth. That's why we are debating. What's real? Is God real? Is the self real? Is the world real? Let's find out through discussion, through debate. Then there is another kind of debate. So this is the kind of the first one, Vada. Krishna mentions it in the Bhagavad Gita. Of all those who discuss abstruse philosophical topics, I am Vada, this form of debate. And Krishna approves of it. Sri Ramakrishna also, he would encourage Narendranath and Girish Ghosh discuss. This Ramchandra Datta, he says, I don't like this discussion, debate and argumentation. And Sri Ramakrishna would, this is a great bhakta, but Sri Ramakrishna would actually come down in favor of Narendranath and Girish Ghosh and say, nah, there's a point to this, let them continue. He would encourage, continue, discuss. This is called Vada, debate. And the goal is truth. Then there is a second kind of debate, which is called Jalpa. What is the Jalpa? Swapaksha Sthapanam Parapaksha Dushanam. So I will cut down your position, I will establish my position. Like a lawyer does in a court. The goal is not so much the truth. The goal is to win. The goal is to show that you are wrong and I am right. This is called Jalpa. Often. So quarrels are like that. I am trying to establish I am right and I am trying to prove that you are wrong. Jalpa. Then there is a third kind of debate called Vitanda. That is, I have nothing to prove, but whatever you say is wrong. And this was seen as a sophisticated form of debate in ancient India. They were great Vaitandins like Nagarjuna, Sriharsha, Jayarashpati, Tattva Vaplava Simha. So they were great Vaitandins. What did Nagarjuna do? All philosophies, whatever your philosophies tell me, I will show you are wrong. This is Shunyata Sarvadrishtina, the emptiness of all philosophies. Don't think that he's crazy or he's just quarrelsome. Sri Ramakrishna says, Shakolei bhabe nijer ghodi thik cholche. Everybody thinks that they're, of course nowadays they're all running through because of internet, we are all synchronized. But earlier when you had this wristwatch or pocket watch, in those days pocket watch they had. Everybody thinks my watch is giving the right time. But none of them match with each other. And none of them may be the right time. Probably none of them are the right time. It's a beautiful story of Immanuel Kant, the great German philosopher in Königsberg. He would He was famous for his the precise timing of his afternoon walks. People would correct their watches by, oh, Kant is walking now, it must be 3 p.m. So they correct 3 p.m. And he would go up to the clock tower. In those days, in the little towns, there would be a clock tower. Even now in some old Indian cities, you see clock tower. You go, a big clock is there. He would go up to the church where there was a clock tower, and then he would walk back to his home. Once the father, the priest of the church, asked him, how do you, he said, what do you do when you come to the church and go back? He says, I go there and I correct my watch with the clock tower. But the clock tower is being set with the Kant's walking. Kant has come, so it must be 3 p.m. Sri Ramakrishna says, everybody thinks their watch is running right. And Nagarjuna says, Shunyata sarvadrishtina. Somebody, the immediate answer is, somebody charged Nagarjuna. Then your philosophy, Shunyavad, that also is empty. Your philosophy is also empty. Nagarjuna's reply is very interesting. He says, if I had a philosophy, you could accuse me of that, but I don't have any philosophy. So you can't accuse me of stating a philosophy which can be cut down. But any other philosophy, you give me any philosophy, I can cut it down. What is its point? The point is that all intellectual conceptions, all systems of thought that we build up, they cannot be the truth. At most, they are like a imprecise map of the truth. The truth is independent of our philosophies. We often take the letter for the spirit. We take the philosophy itself for reality. Philosophy is an intellectual attempt to grasp reality. That's all, not more than that. But if you say, my philosophy is non-duality, and you say, that is reality. No, Nagarjuna says it cannot be. I will show you how your philosophy, by using your philosophy, I will show you self-contradictory. So that is emptiness school. My professor, Professor J. Garfield, I took a course on the Madhyamaka Buddhism of ancient India and Tibet. And he said, he loves it so much. He said, if you can do Madhyamaka, why would you do anything else in the world? That's all you want to do. And he said, what does Nagarjuna want to say? What do these philosophers want to say? What is the self? And he said that if you read Nagarjuna and Madhyamaka Buddhism, Shunyavad, and you feel you're dropping into a bottomless well, then you've got it right. Yeah, they will never let you rest on some philosophical, intellectual basis. No, they'll let you. There is a truth, but they don't want to say it. What is the distinction? So they also call their philosophy non-duality. It is very close to Advaita Vedanta. If you read Nagarjuna's Moola Madhyamaka Karika, and you read, say, Gaudapada, you often use the same language. Prapancha Upashamam Shantam. Gaudapada in actually Mandukya Upanishad, original mantra. The silence of the universe, the quiescence of the universe. What a beautiful phrase. What is Brahman, what is Atman? The silence of the universe. Prapancha Upashamam Shantam. That is Brahman, according to Vedanta. Same phrase, same language, literally the same language is used by Nagarjuna in the invocatory verse on Moola Madhyamaka Karika. Prapanchopashamam Shantam. Shivam also he uses. Auspicious. But what does he mean by that? Shunyam, emptiness. So here are the two differences, subtle difference, the differences between what Advaita, non-duality means for the emptiness people and what non-duality means for us. Grammatical difference. When you say Advaita, the A there means not. So Advaita means non-duality. Now this non-duality, there are two interpretations of it. Listen carefully because there's a slight difference if we hear it. Number one interpretation, non-duality means absence of duality. There is no duality. Second interpretation, that non-duality means that reality in which there is no duality. That thing, not thing, that reality in which there is no duality, that is non-dual. I'll repeat again. Non-duality means absence of duality. That's number one. Non-dual, absence of duality. Or it means that reality, a positive reality, in which there is no duality. Now, which do you think is Advaita Vedanta? It's the second one. Yes. Brahman, in Brahman there is no duality. Brahman is Advaita. In pure being or pure awareness there is no duality. And Nagarjuna, what he seems to say, because he'll never say anything, he's very cagey, he'll never say anything outright. What he seems to say is, he denies duality, non-duality. Now, does he mean a reality or not? He will not say. And his followers till today, their last 2000 years, they have not said. For very good logical reasons. Sharadanandaji, Sharat Maharaj, in his Leela Prashango, he says, what the Buddhists call Shunyam is what we call Purnam. Our view, in the Ramakrishna Vivekananda tradition, and a number of new modern scholars also, I think Dr. Radhakrishnan also and others, they came to this conclusion, what the emptiness school, Shunyavad, is pointing towards, what Advaita Vedanta is pointing towards, is one and the same thing. I'll come back to it later on. But now, so this is the outline of this first line. What did he say? There are these pseudo-philosophers, these fools basically, learned fools, who say body is the self, or living body is the self, or sensory system with the living body is the self. These are very common sense ideas, very, very common sense ideas. Or more sophisticated people, like the mind-only school, Chalam Buddhim. Or more sophisticated ideas, like the emptiness school. And there are many others. There is one way of classifying Indian philosophy is into the 12 systems. 6 heterodox systems and 6 orthodox systems. There are these Charvakas, materialists. There are the Jaina philosophers. There are the 4 schools of Buddhism. Sautrantika, Vaibhashika, Vijnanavada, Shunyavada. 6 schools. And then there are the 6 Hindu schools who believe in the Vedas. The Nyaya, the Vaisheshika, the Sankhya, the Yoga, Purva Mimamsa and Vedanta. 12 schools. And each has its own sub-schools and its own theories of the self. So there's a wide variety of views. But Shankaracharya is dismissive. He says they argue vociferously. Books and debates are conducted. They are very well settled in their own views. But why are there so many views? Why do they think things which are very different from the non-dual consciousness? And he says, because of 4 kinds of problems. These 4 kinds of problems, he gives examples. And that's where he says, like. He doesn't say women, however, or children. Like women, like children, like those who are blind, or like those who are inert, jada. What does he mean by that? Each one I'll explain a little bit and then we'll go ahead. What does he mean by like women? What's the point here? He clearly does not mean women, because all the way back to the Upanishads, you find Gargi, Maitreyi, they were saints, they were women philosophers who had the highest level of understanding. And they engaged in debates with the great Advaita masters like Yajnavalkya and others. So, what he means is, if the intellect, the Vijnanamaya, is heavily under the influence of the mind, of the emotions. So suppose I am predominantly emotional, I have a soft, emotional, affectionate, it's very important to me to have relationships. So that is my worldview. And if I am told there is one non-dual Brahman, no question of relationships. One non-dual Brahman which shines through every relationship, through everything in the world. The whole world is a network of relationships. And you want to overcome samsara. There will be something within my emotional self which will rebel against this, which will push back against this. They'll say, okay, I understand it, I don't like it. I don't want to accept it from within. It's not just women or sensitive men. Many people have this issue. That we may read Advaita, we may even understand the arguments, but we don't accept it from inside. Because I'm so, basically so committed, emotion-centric. Feelings are very important to me. To be an Advaitin, one has to be a little ruthless with oneself. Don't give in to, just because I feel it, Feeling is not truth. Truth is a product of pramana, a source of knowledge. You use your eyes and ears, use science, use logic, and you come to the truth. And you have to accept it as the truth, whether it feels nice to you or not. So going on feeling, one tends to desperately hold on to relationships. And if you do that, Advaita will not be accepted. At least you will not get the benefit of Advaita. That freedom which comes from Advaita. The moment I want a second with whom I want a relationship, either to love or to torture, whatever it is. But I want a second. Jean-Paul Sartre said, hell is other people. So, one must be able to rise above that. And does that mean, so it's not suited for women, Advaita Vedanta? Not at all. Not at all. Doesn't mean that at all. I have seen any number of women, at least equal men with men, who are committed non-dualists and who have grasped and who love non-duality. So, emotions are important, but they should be under the control of the buddhi, not the other way around. The manomaya should be under the control of the vijnanamaya. The vijnanamaya should not be dominated by the manomaya. So I think this is the thrust of what Shankaracharya wants to say. Because he says upama, like. He doesn't say women. He says like emotional, soft, emotional nature. Then bala, children, like children. Again, it doesn't mean that children cannot be non-dualist. There are so many children who are non-dualist. As a kid, I myself loved Vedanta. I didn't understand much, but I loved it. I really liked the idea of non-duality. But, see, what is the problem now is, the child, what is the problem with the child? Is an immature, an undeveloped intellect. Doesn't have enough life experiences. And so we come to immature conclusions. We, unfortunately, live in a child-worshipping age. It's very natural for parents to think their own son or daughter is a genius. Let me tell you, mostly they are not. They're children. That's why they are in school and you are not in school. They're supposed to learn. It's not that they're stupid, they can be very intelligent, but they're immature. I remember somebody wrote to me saying that my daughter, who's 14 years old, has written to me, we say Vedanta is necessary for overcoming suffering. My daughter, who's 14 years old, said that, Papa, you accept all the good and pleasant things in life, so accept all the suffering also. Why do you want to overcome the suffering? You don't want to overcome the happiness. And the gentleman wrote, I don't know, Swamiji, what to reply to this. You don't know because you are a doting father. It's a stupid assertion. Utterly stupid. She is 14 years old. She has not faced suffering. Let's pray she never faces suffering, serious suffering. Nobody who has faced loss, accident, tremendous grief in their lives will ever say, oh, it's all right. I accept it. A cookie is pleasant and the death of a beloved one is also, it is all right, that's acceptable, it's also acceptable. No. We do not, viscerally we do not accept suffering. We reject it, we push it away. It can be a minor pinprick, it can be something as devastating as the loss of a child. Most terrible shock that a human being can have. Parents, grandparents pass away, that is devastating for us, but that's still in the natural order of things. But a parent is alive, a child dies. I've seen a number of such cases. There is no end to that suffering, no end to that sorrow. Somebody put it this way, it's a shadow that never grows shorter. But can you say, oh, take it as it is, fine, it's all right. You cannot say that. That's an immature intellect. Every schoolboy who writes, if I were the Prime Minister or the President, what would I do? I would do this, that, and other thing, and abolish religion. Why? Immature. Has no idea at all what he is talking about. So, Bala Upama, like a child. Not worth taking seriously. I remember, what I just a child? Dog. I was walking in the park with a gentleman who was saying what spiritual lessons, life lessons he has learned from his dog. He was telling me. I was thinking, God is there. You're giving God a dog. Upanishad, Gita, Shastras are there. Forget it all. Swami is walking next to you. Forget it all. I'll give lectures on what my dog has taught me. Okay, so that's Bala, childlike intellect, not serious, not developed enough. Might be intelligent, but not developed enough. Another thing, such a childlike intellect. Sometimes people are very smart in the ways of the world. They can earn $1 million, they can write books, they can get a degree, but they become like children when they come to spirituality. This I see all throughout. The silliest of things can overwhelm them. A little display of so-called quote-unquote miraculous powers. Wow, this is great. Where is Upanishad? I remember this young man who was learning Vedanta. Atman, Brahman, pure consciousness. Yeah, good. Then one day he was learning the puja. And in the puja, ritualistic worship, at one point you have to do the pranayama. You close this nostril, breathe in through this one, and then close it, hold for a certain amount, and then release from that one. When he learned that, his eyes lit up. Wow, this is what I wanted. Child. All Atman, Brahman, Advaita, all very fine. But this. Shankaracharya says in Aparoksha Anubhuti, he says breathing in, what is the in breath? I am Brahman. So he starts with the out breath. He says, what is the meaning of this pranayama? He says, breathing out means you breathe out the universe. The universe is an appearance. It's not a reality. Then you breathe in. What is that? I am the reality. Brahman, existence, consciousness, bliss. Then you hold the breath means I am that, remain centered in that. Then what about this one? He says, Grana Pidanam, that is torturing the nose. Aparoksha Anubhuti will say. Not that he's against it. There is a very important role to be played. But think about the difference in what that idea should be there. What are you, which level are you talking about? You compare a PhD with a ABCD of kindergarten. I say, yeah, both are fine. No, both, it's not the same. There's a huge difference. Huge difference. So these are little Advaita fanatic stuff. Let me tell you a little bit before I go on, since we are on the topic. So these are little stories you get from monks in the Himalayas. You will not find them written anywhere. So he says, this monk was teaching Advaita Vedanta, this kind of thing, that you are Brahman. So he says in Ramayana, Hanuman goes to Lanka to find out where Sita is. And you know, he was caught by the Rakshasas, the demons, Ravana and others. And they couldn't catch him, they fought with him, nobody could defeat him. And then, I think it was Ravana's son who used the Brahmastra on Meghna, who used it on Hanuman. Now the Brahmastra comes to Hanuman, so this is the story part of it. Comes to Hanuman and says, look, I can't do anything to you, I know. But it's a question of my prestige, branding, you know, Brahmastra. So would you please cooperate with me? And Hanuman says, yes, I will cooperate with you. I'll be knocked out, you can knock me out. So he falls unconscious, Hanuman. And the demons are delighted, Rakshasas. But being Rakshasas, I'm translating from the Hindi what I heard. Being Rakshasas, their buddhi is polluted. Brahmastra has knocked him out, but who knows? This powerful monkey, Hanuman, if he just suddenly comes to, he'll kill all of us. So let's make sure, use ropes to tie him up. After Brahmastra has knocked him out, then use ropes to tie him up. Now, felt highly insulted. You fools, it's because of me, out of respect for me that Hanuman is like this. And now you are supplementing it with ropes. I am going, bye. Goodbye. Brahmastra left. Hanuman came up. And that was the end of Lanka. He burned the whole thing down to the ground. Now, the monk said, Brahmastra, this is Aham Brahmasmi, Vedanta. After you get Vedanta, don't go down the hill again. Live your spiritual life based on this. What he said is down the hill, I will not say, you will be scandalized. Basically all of what we consider religion and spirituality. So he said, that's like using the ropes. Yes, Aham Brahmasmi is fine, But let me consult the astrologer also. Pyramid meditation. I will not take your names anyway. There are endless new age stuff. So, then Andha. The Andha means, this is another one. Like the one blind. Blind means intellect by itself. Can I sit? Let me forget Upanishads. Let me not listen to the Guru. Let me not read Dakshinamurti Stotra, attend classes. I'll just sit and think it through and argue my way to enlightenment. With logic, I'll go straight to enlightenment. Is it possible? No, it's like a blind man. The intellect without the support of this. These are what are called pointers. Remember, I've said this earlier. It's not a question of believing in it. It's an insight which you cannot argue your way to. Once this is given to you, that you are this, look, I'm pointing out to you, here is awareness. Now notice these features of awareness. Then the intellect supplements it with arguments. Then the intellect operates on the insights given by Upanishads, given by Dakshinamurti Stotra, given by Bhagavad Gita. That intellect will be able to realize Brahman, will be useful in realizing Brahman. But that intellect which wants to argue, free thinking on my way to enlightenment, won't reach anywhere. So that is, he's calling that Andha. Blind, intellect blinded, without the support of the Upanishads, without the support of Gita, Dakshinamurti Stotra, without that. And then Jada. So there might be some physical problem in the sense of maybe, there is a deficiency of IQ, there is a physical illness, or somebody is so addicted to drugs, whatever it is, some kind of obstruction, jada, which makes the mind unable to operate. That person, even any kind of high thinking, philosophy, science is difficult for that person, let alone Advaita Vedanta. So these are the reasons. This is very pejorative. Shankaracharya says, why these fools who say, I am the body, or I am the senses and with the living body, or I am the mind which is continuously flashes of consciousness, or I am emptiness, he dismisses all of that. This is all, why does all this happen? Because of the ignorance. Maya Shakti has two powers. One is Avarana, one is Vikshepa. One covers our real nature as the non-dual consciousness. And the Vikshepa is the projecting power, which projects this non-dual consciousness as this universe. Not knowing Brahman because of the veiling power of Maya. What happens to us? We, from ignorance comes error. From ajnana comes adhyasa. This is the technical words. So I do not know who am I, what am I. What do I see? There are thoughts, feelings, emotions, mind, personality. I am this person in this body. Then I am this. If I knew I am this limitless awareness, which is very obvious to me, then I would not identify with this body and mind, nor with any other body and mind. I would still function through this body and mind, but I wouldn't say I am it any more than I say I am this shirt. Okay. So Maya Shakti Vilasa Kalpita Maha Vyamoha Sangharini. The great covering, the great veiling done by the power of Maya, that is cut asunder, rent asunder by the teachings of the Guru. That Guru I salute, who is none other than Dakshinamurti. Then let me go on to the next verse. Now notice one thing here. He hasn't actually refuted anything. He just called them names and then went ahead. And he said, the Charvakas, various kinds of materialists, the mind-only school, the emptiness school, and many other philosophies. They're all wrong. They argue vociferously. It's because of problems in their understanding. That's it. Gone. Going ahead. So there's no time to you refer to endless books, and books are there where you can take up the arguments. So I'm also not going to go into the arguments. You can apply it. I've given such arguments, for example, in Aparokshanubhuti. Shankaracharya gives detailed arguments. Why I am not the body? Why I am not the prana or the mind? Why I am not the intellect? We have talked about those arguments different times. Savikara, Nirvikara, Drashta, Drishya, Chetana, Jada. ekam, anekam, like that. Multiple arguments are there. Only one he wants to refute, and that's the emptiness, the Nagarjuna school, the school of emptiness. That one is the in the sixth verse. Sixth verse is refutation of the emptiness school. Why only this one? Well, as a sample, but also there's something that, there's a way of doing this. In the Brahma Sutras, which are the text of Vedanta, you find a detailed refutation of the other schools of philosophy, especially Sankhya. And the idea is Pradhana Malla Nyaya. So if you want the world championship in boxing, you don't go out fighting against every boxer on the planet. You challenge the current reigning world champion. And if you defeat that world champion, you are the world champion. Similarly, if you challenge the most difficult, subtle philosophy which is against you, which has defeated everything else so far, if you defeat that one, you are the reigning champion, you get the cup. So Shankaracharya selects, in that sense, he selects the emptiness people, the Madhyamaka school, the emptiness school. So this mind-only school and the emptiness school, a synthesis of this is right now, it is the main philosophy of the Tibetan Buddhism. His Holiness the Dalai Lama and the Tibetan Buddhists, their philosophy is this emptiness and the mind-only school. Now, before I jump into this, I'll just make an observation and then go into it. What you will see now is the way classical Advaita Vedanta sees the emptiness school. What is that? The way Shankara and his followers, and not only Shankara and his followers, most other Indian philosophers at that time, the Nyaya school, the Nyaya Vaisheshika, the Sankhyans, especially the Purva Mimamsakas like Kumarila Bhatta and others, all of them seem to see the emptiness school as saying there is nothing, that they are nihilists. According to this emptiness school, what is the nature of reality? There is no reality. It's all empty. It's all shunyam. It's all void. Shunyam, shunyam, sarvam shunyam. It's all void. What's wrong with this? What's wrong with this is, if you actually look at the texts of the emptiness school, Mula Madhyamaka Karika, and other texts, Chandrakirti's commentary on Prasannapada, commentary on Nagarjuna, those texts do not support such an interpretation. So when you want to refute somebody, if you want to refute you, I must refute what you are saying, not what I think about you. So it seems there might have been a kind of misunderstanding on both sides. When the emptiness school, Shunyavadis attack us, the non-dualists, what they attack is, these people are saying there is something called Atma, there is something called Brahman, eternal thing they think. And then they will show there is no such thing, so they are wrong. These non-dualists are wrong. But we never say there is a particular thing called the Atma. The existence of all things is not one more thing. Consciousness which makes all knowledge possible is not one more type of knowledge. It's like this. Gold, let's take the golden ornaments example. Not perfect, but good example. Now you have necklaces, you have a necklace, you have a bracelet, you have a ring. I like this example. They're made of gold. If somebody tells you that there is a reality called gold, it's the real thing. And if I misunderstand, I've just seen the ornaments, then I go looking for, I ask, show me the gold, that ornament which is called gold. I think necklace is one ornament, bracelet is another ornament, ring is one more ornament, and there is a fourth type of ornament called gold. I am mistaken. Because gold is not one more type of ornament. You will not find it in the catalog in golden ornaments. Tiaras, necklaces, bracelets, gold. No, you'll never find it that way. So trying to mistake, thinking that gold is one more type of ornament. Atman or Brahman is not one more type of entity. It's not one more type of existing thing. Just as gold is the reality of all those ornaments, similarly Atman or Brahman is the reality of everything. That's what Advaita Vedanta wants to say. And what do the emptiness school, what do they really want to say? Another mistake is possible. Suppose somebody says, there is no ornament called gold. You say, show me the gold. I've shown you necklace, I've shown you ring, I've shown you bracelet, but I said, no, I have heard there's something called gold which is really important. Show me the gold. And then that man tells me, there is no ornament called gold. There is no separate thing called gold. And then if I understand, oh, so gold doesn't exist. Gold doesn't exist. Then I am wrong. Because gold is the one which really exists. And all your necklace, bracelet, ring are all dependent on the gold for their existence. So these are the two mistakes. The mistaken way of understanding Shunyavad is that they are saying there is nothing. It's like thinking there is no such thing as gold. And the mistaken way of understanding Advaita Vedanta is to think that Atman, Brahman is one more thing. It's like a person saying gold is one more ornament. Gold is not one more ornament, it is the reality of all ornaments. Gold is not nothing, it is the reality of everything. So these are two ways of misunderstanding. I can put it even more simply. One way of misunderstanding Shunyavad is that they are saying it's nothing. One way of misunderstanding Advaita Vedanta is that Advaita is saying there is a thing called Brahman. The truth is, both are trying to say there is no thing, which is the ultimate reality. No thing, no hyphen thing. Now, what Shankara presents here is the classical Advaita understanding, within quotes, maybe misunderstanding, who knows. I'm not bold enough to say that Shankara and all the Indian philosophers misunderstood Advaita Vedanta, misunderstood Shunyavada. That is also a big claim, it's a tall claim. How is it that Shankara and Madhva and Ramanuja and also the ancient Indian philosophers, Nayayikas, Vaisheshikas, Sankhyanas, all of them thought Shunyavada means nothing, nihilism. I can't sit here in 21st century in Canada and say, oh, they all misunderstood. I am the one who understands correctly. That's also, there's a reason. I was talking just this morning with our Mohan Maharaj here, why I think they may not be far off the mark also. I remember my professor in Indian philosophy, Parimal Patil, who teaches Indian philosophy at Harvard University. I asked him this question. Isn't it a misunderstanding to say that the emptiness school are nihilists? They say that there's nothing is existing. And he says, is it? Is it? Could be that that's what they're trying to say. This continuous denial of any logical ground, does this, in the limiting case, lead to nihilism or to the truth? He is a philosopher, of course, he prefers to keep it open. All right, enough introduction. Rahu Krasta Divakara Indu Sadrisho Maya Samachadana Sanmatra Karna Upasangharanato Yo Abhut Sushupta Puman Pragaswapsam iti prabodha samayi Yah pratyabhigyayate Tasmai Shri Gurumurtaye Namaidam Shri Dakshinamurtaye. As the brilliance of the sun or the moon exists even when intercepted by Rahu during eclipse, the power of cognition remains suspended from the senses and the mind during sleep. The Purusha or the Self exists as the pure being, unrecognized through Maya's veiling power. On waking, he becomes aware that he himself was asleep earlier. Similarly, the man of realization on waking to the consciousness of the Self, which is pure being, recognizes it, his previous ignorance, as a past event and an apparent phenomenon. He by whose grace this recognition of the true nature of the Atman comes to me, to that Dakshinamurti, the Supreme Being, embodied in the benign and auspicious Guru, I offer my profound salutation. So, this is a refutation of the emptiness school. Now, what is Shankara's depiction of the position of the Madhyamaka, Shunyavada? What he says is, Shunyavada says, you say the self is limitless consciousness. All the time awareness is there. I am, this consciousness is there. But in deep sleep, we are not aware of the world. We are not aware of ourselves. I I am sleeping. Nobody is aware of that. And that is the real nature of the self. Nothing. That is the real nature of the world. Nothing. In that nothingness appears the dream world, appears the waking world, appears the self to cognize the dream world, appears the self to cognize the waking world. They arise and fall together. They mean subject and object. Chandrakirti, the commentator of Nagarjuna, uses a very interesting metaphor which is not used in Vedanta. Two bales of hay tied together, they lean against each other. If you remove one, the other will fall. That is subject and object. I am experiencing this world. Take away the world, Nagarjuna suggests, you will also disappear. Take away yourself, the world will also disappear. It seems to be very logical, and this is what happens in deep sleep. And he says, that void of the deep sleep is the nature of quote-unquote reality. That's what is appearing to you now. There is no reality here whatsoever. In your waking, it's not even that waking is like a dream, like the mind-only school suggests, even Advaita Vedanta suggests. He says waking and dream are like deep sleep. In deep sleep there is nothing, so in waking also there is nothing, in dream also there is nothing. Shunyam, shunyam, sarvam shunyam. Comes from the Buddha statement. Anityam, anityam, sarvam anityam. Impermanent, impermanent, indeed all is impermanent. Kshanikam, kshanikam. So impermanent we all understand. But not only just impermanent. It's fine if it's impermanent. If I live for 100 years, that's impermanent, but it's good enough for me. If a cookie, I eat a cookie, it's impermanent, I know. Who wants a permanent cookie? It should last for 10 seconds and it's fine. I don't want a cookie to last 1,000,000 years. So impermanent is fine with us. We don't mind impermanence. But then Buddha goes on to say, it's not impermanence of 100 years. Momentary, 1 second. Everything lasts for kshanika. 1 moment only. Kshanikam, kshanikam, sarvam kshanikam. Momentary, momentary, all is momentary. And then, not even that it lasts for 1 second. It does not exist. It's empty of any nature. There is no it. Shunyam, shunyam, sarvam shunyam. Emptiness, emptiness, all is emptiness. Void, void, all is void. And therefore, your point is, Mr. Buddha, what is your point? Dukkham, dukkham, sarvam dukkham. Sorrow, sorrow, all is sorrow. Or unhappiness, or dissatisfaction. All is dissatisfaction. Because changing, changing, so everything is changing, anityam. Momentary, momentary, all is momentary. All emptiness, emptiness, all is empty. Or void. Suffering, suffering, all is suffering. And that's the whole this thing which Nagarjuna takes up, the emptiness, emptiness, all is emptiness. What is Shankaracharya's reply to that? He says, no, you are right, subject and object disappear together, but there is a ground of both the subject and object. Vivekananda says, one only exists, it appears as nature, soul. There is one reality, it appears as nature, object, and soul, the perceiving soul. Nagarjuna seems to deny that underlying one. That one, it continues to exist in deep sleep also. You know, what is it like? Right now, we are all awake, you are all looking here. This is waking word. According to Mandukya Upanishad, waking word is defined when I, the consciousness, I use my mind and senses to interact with the world. This is waking word. Now just try it. Close your eyes. Imagine you are not hearing anything also. Just listen to my words, of course. But so you are not feeling, body feeling is neutral. You're not tasting anything, not smelling anything. And you're not seeing anything, certainly. Not using senses to contact an external world. But the mind is churning away. That's like the dream world. It's a sort of simulation of a dream world. Internally, the mind is churning away. Thinking, thoughts, feelings, ideas, emotions, memories, fantasies, they're coming. This is like the dream world. Now suppose the dream world also, the mind also stops. No external world, no body feeling, no thought, no memory, no sense of I, nothing, blank. That blankness is also something that I am experiencing. Now gently open your eyes. This was waking, dreaming and deep sleep. At no point did you feel that you disappeared. Of course, you might say this is just a thought experiment. You did it all just in the waking state. Fine. But this is just a kind of a thought experiment to see what waking is like. what is called the gross world, sthula. What the dream is like, sukshma, the subtle world. And what deep sleep is like, karana, the causal world, like a seed. From that again the waking and dreaming have come. They cycle. At no point you feel you have disappeared. That's what Shankara wants to say. Rahu grasta divakara, it's like an eclipse. So when an eclipse comes, you don't see the sun. That doesn't mean the sun has stopped shining. You don't see the moon. That doesn't mean the moon has stopped shining. You don't see it at that point. Similarly, in deep sleep, what Nagarjuna says, consciousness disappears altogether. No, consciousness is still shining. But there is nothing to shine on. Nothing for consciousness to be reflected on. Exactly like this. There is light right here. The moment I raise my hand, you see it shines in this white light. You can see it here. But if you remove it in this place, you can't see anything. If you put it there, you can see. Taking the hand away is like taking the world away, taking the mind away. Consciousness is still shining like that light. There is nothing for consciousness to reveal. And that's Shankara's position. Maya samachadana. By ignorance, consciousness is covered over, as it were. Sanmatra, I continue. This is actually quoting from Chandogya Upanishad. Swam apito bhavati. Sata saumya sampanno bhavati. That means I exist as existence only. Not as mind and thinking and senses and word. Just as bare existence, I continue to exist. Proof. After waking up, here's a subtle point he makes. After waking up, this is a classic Advaita response. After waking up, I felt, I was sleeping. I slept happily. I did not know anything. And now I am awake. He says, Pratyavijnayate. He recognizes that one which had that experience of utter blankness is that one which is having the experience of the waking world. That one is continuous. There's a subtle point here. Recognition. The word pratyavijna means recognition. 3 words I will give you. Perception, memory, recognition. When I'm seeing you, I'm perceiving. I'm not remembering you now. I'm seeing you. When I'm not seeing you, but I remember, that's memory. So one is perception, one is memory. Perception is when I'm directly seeing you. That is perception, seeing. I'm not seeing you, but I remember I saw such and such person many years ago. That's memory. But recognition is both. I am seeing you and I recognize. My memory also works. You are that person I saw there, in that other city. I recognize you. Oh, you are that one. Similarly, he's saying here that when I wake up, and I say, I slept happily. Who is that I? I recognize that one who slept happily as this one who is awake now. There is direct experience of myself, but also quote-unquote memory. Why I'm saying quote-unquote, there's no time to explain. There cannot be memory as we know it in deep sleep. But anyway, quote-unquote memory, and if that is there, then there must have been an experience in deep sleep, which we are collating together and saying, oh, I am the one who slept. I am awake. One Advaita master, very subtle analysis he has done here. He says this is a fault line in Maya. If you investigate this, you will become enlightened. Why? What is the fault line? The mind who is now awake says, I am awake. What is that? It's consciousness plus mind, which is saying, I am awake now. I was sleeping. I slept happily. Now I am awake. But the mind which is saying this cannot say it honestly, because the mind, when it was sleeping, who was sleeping? The mind was sleeping. The mind can't say, I was sleeping there. What was the witness of the sleeping mind? It is the same witness now with the active mind which is saying, I am awake now. Point again. The mind cannot honestly say, I was sleeping, now I am awake. Can't say that. Because the sleeping mind was not cognized by the sleeping mind. What cognized the sleeping mind? In deep sleep, what am I? If you investigate this, this is a doorway to direct enlightenment. Alright, let's stop here. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.